Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the EFL Fantasy Podcast. My name is Angus,
My name is Dan.
and we're here to review the Game Week 2 action. The action keeps coming, and we're learning more and more as it goes along, I think, or changing our minds rapidly with every game, which is probably more like it. So we will be going through the Game Week 2 action, much the same as last week. We've picked out some games we want to talk about. um, before which we'll go through sort of our teams and the team news from the weekend, go through all that action, and then answer your questions. But first things first, Dan, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, Angus. Better result than last week. Not getting hammered 4-1. We drew 0-0. Had a kamikaze Kaminsky taking out two players. Yeah, it, proper away day, Portsmouth. I don't know if you've ever been, Angus, but
No.
it's good atmosphere, and obviously it was their first game back in the championship, so they were up for it. So yeah, um, unlike the Premier League, the Championship wasn't as predictable. So yeah, lots of high scoring games again this week.
Yeah, it's certainly sort of thrown up lots of interesting sort of goal scorers, results. Guess we might as well sort of dive straight into it. So first, obviously, we're going to talk about how we did this week. I'll go first. I got 75 -4. Yes, I already took a -4, although I will just frame it with saying that including a vice captaincy on one of the players I bought, I sold 0 points and bought 29. So it went to plan. Uh, I got I had Davis in goal for 3, Pring for 3, Firpo for 5, Engel for 4, Doughty for 10. Perez vice captaincy for 13 was one of my purchases in for Joe Bryan. Uh, Azaz for 6, Clark for 11, Joseph for 2, Latte Lap captain for 2, and Hadji Wright was my other purchase for 16 on the Friday night. So that went to plan. Um, Red Arrow, once sort of everything had been adjusted, but at this stage of the season, there's only so much sort of meaning I'm going to attach to that. Generally, I'm pretty happy with how I've been doing. And there's one or two things that I'm looking at changing this week, but generally speaking, I'm getting to a point where I'm quite happy with what I've got, and it's just sort of making the odd move here and there. Um, Managed to have two goal scorers on the bench as well in Sissoko and Abdullahi, so at least I've got good depth, you could say. But yeah, Dan, how did you do this week?
So I got just 66. Um, my transfer was Kiefer Moore in for Rutter, who's just moved to Brighton. I had Jensen in goal for -1. So we've had two game weeks and he's managed to go down in price. So not the best start there. I had Bogle for 5, Ayling for 7, Harry Darling for 6, Doughty for 10, Azaz 6, O'Hare 6. I vice captained Clark for 16, Joseph for 2, Latte Laff captained for 2, which was a bit frustrating, and then Kiefer Moore for 7. So a lot of my players sort of returned with like clean sheets or bonus, just they just didn't haul, and I didn't get the captaincy right either. So it's a red arrow down to 886, but not too bothered. A lot of people have played boosts and things like that. But yeah, I think I've been playing four at the back the first two game weeks, and there's been a lot of goals, so that's not gone too well. So I'm going to probably move one of my 4.5s up to a someone in around 6 to 7 million, I think. But yeah, looking forward to game week 3. Hopefully, get a green arrow.
Yeah, it feels like, particularly with some of these early boosts, it's like, okay, now's the time to sort of like not quite gain a bit of ground back, but um, start sort of leveling things out a little bit. Um, but yeah, so that's sort of obviously how we did, progressing along. Next thing we've got is the team news, which is back to you.
Yeah, so we'll start with Coventry. The main news was Hadji Wright was in for Mason Clark. He had an injury in pre-season, which was why he didn't start the first game, but he definitely started the second one. Um, how happy with Angus were you when he rounded the goalie or
Oh,
played clean through?
I was sort of, I didn't quite know, because I'd literally been sitting trying to work out how many bonus he was, and then I saw him through, and it just made my day.
For Borough, Burzell came in for McGree. New signing Conway was on the bench. For Portsmouth, Sadie started up front for Sorensen. For Luton, Bell and Clark were back in for the two youngsters, Johnson and Nelson. Leeds, Piero started in for Rutter. Burnley, Odebear was sold and he was replaced by Jay Rodriguez. Cardiff, Kanga and Mate were in for Tanner and Robinson. Norwich, Christine Forsyth, a youngster, and Amwakwa was in. For Sheffield United, new signings Cooper and Rasaki were on the bench. QPR, Varane, Dembele, Lloyd, and Fry started. For Plymouth, Edwards, Mumba, and Hardy started. For Hull, Giles moved back to left back with Liam Miller coming in at left wing. New signings Charlie Hughes and Burso were on the bench. Swansea, Ronald and Cooper were in. Vitnovic was still on the bench, but he came on and scored, so I wonder if that means he'll start the next game. For Watford, Morris was in for one of the centre backs. I think it was Sierralta. For Sunderland, Rig was in for Brown. And for Sheffield Wednesday, Ugbo was on the bench.
Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff around. I think a couple of things that took us by surprise, but I think some of the stuff that took us by surprise in game week one, sort of moving more to what we would have expected, particularly with things like Ronaldo coming in and things like that, sort of making it more in line with what we expected. But yeah, so some interesting stuff there. Um, so we'll move into sort of the games that we want to talk about. And I think it, I know I'm throwing back to you again, but I think it's the only place to start, given that you've already mentioned it. The
Yeah.
first game that you wanted to talk about from this game week.
Yeah, so it's the Friday night game, Coventry against Oxford. Everyone else who's a Premier League fan had to sit through Man United and Fulham, but if you were, wanted proper football in the Championship, you could watch Coventry and Oxford free too. I was intrigued with this game. Obviously, Coventry hadn't had a great result in the first game, losing to Stoke, but had made some decent signings in the summer. And Oxford got a great win against Norwich, and I wanted to see how they adapted to life in the Championship. And I think both teams will be fairly happy with their performance overall. I think Coventry did deserve to win. When you look at a lot of the stats, they can create six big chances. Um, I thought Wright was excellent. You had Van Eric and Sakamoto. I was watching the game and then I remembered how much I enjoyed watching Sakamoto. He doesn't always get the returns, but he's so lively, and I felt sorry for Placheka having to deal. He kept on having to come back to help out. Um, obviously it started with a Hadji Wright goal, Van Eyck assist, um, and then Oxford got the leveler. And Oxford at times looked quite dangerous on the counter. They're quite good playing through the lines. We've mentioned a few times with their midfield three of Volks, Brannigan, and Rodriguez. They're capable on the ball and they have pace out wide with Placheka and Goodrum. And then Harris, who he does get a goal later on, but he's a workhorse and he's willing to close down everything. Um, so yeah, it was 1-1, and then you go into the second half. Oh, sorry, not the second half. Van Eyck had a thunderbolt, didn't he?
Yeah,
Um, we've mentioned a lot of times last season that he's very attacking, gets in goal scoring opportunities and assists, and he's already gotten a goal and assist. Um, Sims was with that assist. Um, and then second half, Harris scores, which looked like offside, and scored with his knob, and he was quite happy to tell everyone on the on the camera that he did. Um, and it looked like it was petering out. Coventry had a lot of chances, but couldn't find the breakthrough. And then, as we mentioned, um, Fulks with a terrible back pass, and it sends Hadji right clean through rounds the goalie and scores. So yeah, I think both will be happy. Coventry deserve to win. Oxford showed that they're going to be able to compete at this level, especially against maybe the mid-table and lower teams. Um, Anything to take away, Angus? Anyone? I know you've got Hadji right, but are you interested in any other players?
I was about to say it's all about Hadji Wright. I'd sort of been saying beforehand that I had a feeling about Hadji Wright even in this game, and obviously that went better than I could have hoped. Um, I think he was even on top bonus before he got the second goal. Um, but yeah, I mean, we've talked about some of these players before. I don't think Sims is bad for anyone who's on him. You talked about Sakamoto. I think the other one that, as you mentioned, that I'd probably be looking at is Van Evite, just because um, gets forward so much, decent end product, and particularly when you've got someone getting forward and getting crosses into the box and that sort of thing. When you've got Ellis Sims and Hadji Wright in there, it's sort of like you've got a decent chance of connecting. So I think that's where I'd sort of be looking really. Whether I'd sort of do it now, it's another matter entirely, but I think there's probably a few options there.
Yeah, I agree. What about Oxford, Angus? Any
I've
options there?
been really impressed with them. I sort of said before the season, I think when we talked about them, I'm a fan of Ruben Rodriguez, who obviously got an assist here. I think if I were looking at them, it would still be Brannigan. I think
Yeah,
he's looked excellent in the first two games. Um, I think we were expecting him to step up to the championship and sort of fit in. I think they've done a good job, Oxford. I've been quite impressed with them. Um, Harris, I guess, if you're looking cheap, although they've brought in Scarlett, so you'd expect that he's going to play. But I think Brannigan's the main one, Rodriguez, and I think Jamie coming in goal looks a decent keeper. He made a couple of incredible saves. There was one where I think he had to scramble across his goal to keep it out. And so I just think if he's going to keep that spot, he could be a good one to pick up.
yeah, I agree. I do worry with maybe Rodriguez and Placheka. I just want they're still sort of trying to find their squad. I do wonder if, especially against maybe the harder teams, where Rodriguez might be the one that will drop out. Um, and obviously they got Matt Phillips, who he's quite reliable, isn't he? So
Yeah, so I think that's where, it feels like, as much as I like Rodriguez and everything, all roads do lead back to Brannigan if you're
yeah,
looking at Oxford. Um, And I do think that they're showing. I think they will be one that you can look at to potentially get goals against, but they will probably get goals themselves
Yeah,
by the
I
looks of
agree.
them in these games. So that's sort of the, I guess, the key takeaways from that one. The first game that I wanted to talk about, it's one of the strangest games of the weekend in terms of if you look at anything about the match versus the final scoreline, which is Burnley 5, Cardiff nil. And as I say, if you look at anything about this game, if you look at any of the sort of data or anything, you see that and you think, oh God, Cardiff, or wow, Burnley, and you look at it, and Burnley scored 5 goals off 0.81 xg. Cardiff had 0.62, but Cardiff had more shots. I think uh, Burnley keeper made more saves. Like it's so weird. And you look at some of the strikes, sort of for Burnley, and it's sort of like, okay, this is just sort of like not quite everything they were hitting was going into the goal. But you look at some of these finishes, particularly the ones for um, Amdouni and Goodmanson, um, and you're sort of like, okay, like this is just getting a bit silly now. It all starts with the comedy own goal, where Horvath just fails to control a back pass and it goes in. You've got the Kolyosho goal where it just sort of falls to him. Um, Brownhill scores, Amdouni scores, Goodmanson scores. The Amdouni one was what a hit that was in off the bar. One of those that needed the goal line technology because it went down so quickly and hit the ground. Like without that, you probably wouldn't have known. Goodmanson a rarity on his wrong foot as well, I think. Uh, but yeah, and so I think it's one of those interesting things where a lot of the Burnley assets you're still looking at off the back of this game, even though it hasn't been sort of the most impressive game, and I wouldn't get too carried away. They've still scored 5 goals, and those players are still options. I think Lyle Foster owners or purchasers this week will be feeling pretty aggrieved, particularly because he managed to get himself booked. 2 of the goals came after he was replaced. Um, Anyone like me on Perez, who managed to get 3 bonus despite not having an attacking return in the game, um, I think shows the sort of option that he could be at times this season. Um, Brownhill, I think, is still interesting. Um, they're they're still to a degree a watch and wait for me because there's so much talk around about various players that could be on the move in the next week or two, um, or next what, almost two
Days,
weeks.
yeah.
Um, including some that I didn't even realize were potentially on the move. Like I saw a story today linking a couple of players like Vitinho with moves away. So I think you have to be careful if you're going to pick up some of these Burnley players, but I think they're showing that they are still options. Cardiff, I think it's a case of not necessarily overreacting. Like they had moments in this game, and not necessarily getting too concerned. Like, if people were looking at someone like Perry and G at the moment, I know there's been sort of looking around at defenders a bit. I wouldn't necessarily be put off by the scoreline in this game, because it is one of those sort of almost like freak occurrences, and it's one of the most difficult games of the season out of the way now.
Cardiff have the derby match against Swansea on Sunday, so yeah, he might. I know they've had 2 tricky games with Sunderland and Burnley, but you throw in that Swansea game, they've then got Middlesbrough, they've got Derby, and then Leeds. He could very easily have not many points, and then I wonder if he'll be a bit under pressure.
Potentially, I know there's a little bit of frustration. Obviously, they've made investment, but I think it will still be okay. We've played Sunderland and Burnley, and then had the derby to start the season. But yeah, it's the sort of thing where the murmuring start.
Especially, yeah, if you win the derby, you'll be all right. If you lose it, though, you'll be in a bit of a trouble, I think.
Mm.
But yeah, there's no one really for Cardiff for me. Um, Burnley, I think you're wise to go for Perez because they've just signed him. Surely he's not going to go. Um, yeah, you've obviously got Hladky who came in this time, but people won't go for that. And we were wondering who would come in for Odebear, who randomly just turned up at Spurs, and I'm not sure many people would have picked Jay Rodriguez out of all the Zahuri and Benson and all those
Mm.
options. So I think Koleoshu, it looks like he's going to stay as well. So I know they've still got a fairly tricky run, but yeah, I think long term he might be the midfield option.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I think there'll obviously be one or two that clarify sort of as it goes along. You could do, like I said, you could also argue maybe someone like Josh Brownhill, but
Yeah.
I think Osho could be a good one. Um, Bit of the concern that I had around Foster, it was the one concern I had about him was essentially, particularly while Veghorst was still there. And first game it was sort of very late substitution. This game it was after 75 minutes that Veghorst came on, so it was a little bit earlier.
They're
Um,
3-0 up though, weren't they?
yeah, but it's just the sort of thing of like the fact that he's still there, the fact that there's the little bit. I mean, there's competition for places everywhere in that Burnley squad just because they have so many players as well. But it's just the one slight concern. Although, like you say, I do think there's a little bit. They were 3-0 up. He'd been booked. Like you can just do that sort of thing, and it's not necessarily a big deal. So I wouldn't be rushing to sell Foster, but yeah, it's a frustrating one for owners. Um, Next game we have to talk about is, I'm sure, the one we all expected to be an absolute banger. Bristol City against Millwall, Dan.
Yeah, so um, I've quite liked Bristol City this year. I think they haven't really lost too many key players. I know apart from Conway, but they've brought in Armstrong and Malelu to sort of balance that out. And they started really well here. Bristol City were 2 up in 12 minutes. Sinclair Armstrong playing a key part in both goals. The first one, he sort of gets to the byline, plays it across it. It hits a deflection, and then Mehmeti's there to fire home. And then Armstrong with I think it was a header from a Max Bird cross. And we sort of mentioned him when he transferred to Bristol City at 5.5 million. I think he might have maybe gone up a bit. That he would be a good option, and he's got all the tools to be like a really good option, but sometimes he's lack composure, doesn't always do the right things at the end. But if he keeps doing goals and assists, then he's going to become an option very quickly. So it looked like they were quite comfortable, and then you had the spell of um, Mill turning it around, and by the 64th minute they were winning 3-2. S scored from a Honeyman assist. You then had the Bradshaw penalty, and then Duncan Watmore with another great finish to make it 3 goals in 2 games. Um, and then you're thinking, well, Millwall will just go and win this again, but no, it takes another turn with Mulu with a goal, another Max Bird assist. If I watched the key highlights of this game, and Max Bird basically ran the game. Um, he was at Derby last year. Bristol City brought him in January, but they loaned it back to Derby, and then So they've obviously got him from from the summer, and yeah, like I mentioned, controlled the game, but also 2 assists. Um, and then 88th minute, I was going to say new signing, but he was there last year. Scott Twine was there to get the fourth. So yeah, very up and down game. Um, I think Mill have created the most big chances in the first two games in 10. Um, they've conceded a lot as well, but I think we went into the season thinking Millwall would be quite defensive, and they've ended up conceding 7 goals and scoring five. So, um, any of these teams, do you think there's any options? Obviously, Bristol City has done quite well this game.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm on Pring. I benched him in the first game and he got bonus. He obviously didn't in this game because of the score line. Um, but I think he's still an option. We've talked about him before as well with the bonus and everything. O'Leary, I still think is another one of those goalkeepers at 5.0 that I think can be considered. Bird, very interesting with the returns in this game. Twine come into the team and Armstrong at that price. So I do think they actually have a few options in that team that could be interesting. In terms of Millwall, you are never going to find me recommending Duncan Watmore as an option. Um, I was quite happy to sell Joe Bryan. Um, that's two playing 0 pointers for Joe Bryan to start the season. Um, I think Essa is one to watch at a very cheap price. Um, but feels like from this game, I don't know if you feel the same that there's more that you're looking at from Bristol City than from Millwall.
Yeah, I agree. I think one interesting thing will be when Tanganga comes back in, whether he'll shore the defence up a little bit, because obviously he's been suspended for the first couple of games. Um, I wonder, I think he might help. Um, but yeah, as someone who went for Jensen, it's been a bit of a nightmare. He's got no points and he's managed to drop in price. Um, yeah, Bristol City, like I mentioned, I think Wine, if I sort of want to see where if he does come into the team next game and at 6.5. I know we've been saying this for 2 years that he will be a good option, but it feels like if he starts becoming the main man for Bristol City, then I do think he'll do very well this year.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and you see with the goal, he's capable. We know he's capable. I think he just needed to actually find a home. And if he's found one, then he could certainly be an option. So yeah, so the next game we've got is one that I definitely thought we'd be talking about. Another one that I definitely thought we'd be talking about. Watford 3, Stoke nil. Dan is not happy, in part because Watford are interesting and we have to talk about them, and that's not right. um, and it was Edo Kayembe again, 2 goals. Um, Ryan Andrews with the other one. Um, and yeah, I mean Andrews looked very good. I was watching the highlights and he was involved a number of times. Kayembe obviously in the support role, Chakvetadze there. Um, and it's just interesting because I think there's something about it with Watford um, where they have a few of these guys that are options. I think Kayembe suddenly being an attacking midfielder has really changed things, particularly being on some of those set pieces as well,
Yeah.
where he suddenly like flies onto the radar. Chakvetadze we knew was a good player, and I think he's still interesting. And and like I say, Andrews, just in terms of watching the highlights, how involved he was. sort of jumped out as well. But it was just sort of strange. I think it's a little bit of a bump, or it feel like a little bit of a bump for Stoke as well after the joy of the opening game to then sort of to this. But I think you'll end up with some of these results. It's sort of inevitable. Um, but yeah, I guess like particularly off the back of this, Sam, what are your thoughts on these two?
I mentioned Kayembe last week about him playing in the 10 position. Um, it's gone up to 5.7, but if he's playing as a number 10 at that sort of price, he's going to become an option, isn't he? Andrews has always looked pretty lively whenever he's played for Watford, and if they start keeping clean sheets with him playing as a wing back because they're playing three at the back, he's going to do well for bonus and probably attacking returns as well. So KMB and Andrews would probably be the two that would be high on my list. Chepkadze, I think he's 7 million, so it puts him in a different bracket where can you get to him easily? Um, yeah, they they definitely seen more options this year than they did last year. Um, just trying to find the next games, run of games. I think they got Derby next. Uh, so they've got Derby at home, Sheffield United away, Coventry at home, Norwich away, Sunderland at home. It's not the best run, Angus, is it?
No, it's not ideal, but I think particularly if you're punting, like I think that maybe comes into play more with someone like Chakvetadze, who's a bit more
Yeah,
expensive. If you're looking at Kayembe, it's almost just worth the punt because, like, if you've got moderately decent fixtures for someone at that price who's obviously made a
yeah,
flying start, it's almost like how much is it just worth the punt?
yeah. I think I agree. I think we'll learn a bit more though. I know Derby, they'll be expected to win that. You've then got Sheffield United and Coventry, two teams who I think will be up there. So yeah, I'm not ruling them out as options. They've obviously found a way of playing under uh, Cleverly, which could see him into the top half this year. But yeah, I'm not rushing out to get him.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the fact that Kiembe, I mean, he's going up in price, but he's still very affordable, where it's sort of
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
um, you could potentially look at other things and come back to it. It's not gonna be sort of like a deal breaker. And like you say, I think particularly going into the Sheffield United and Coventry games in 4 and 5 make it a little bit more of an awkward proposition. Um, but yeah, so that was a sort of an unexpected sort of game to be talking about. I think for your final game, it's one that we would have been much more expecting to talk about with Sunderland against Sheffield Wednesday.
Yeah, so I think you talked about Sheffield Wednesday last week, so they're here again, but I think we're going to be doing a lot of talking about Sunderland this week. Um, Sunderland last week had a great result against Cardiff, 2-0 away, and they backed it up with a 4-0 win. Um, we mentioned before coming on about how many options Sunderland have, and they basically have options throughout their whole team. Um, although I'm not sure Windass will want to rewatch this game because you could argue he's probably at fault for the first three goals. Um, so the first goal is a clever free kick from Patrick Roberts and Dennis Erkins there to head it home. They basically 4 minutes later, um, they try and play out Sheffield Wednesday. It's played into Windass, who tries to flick it around the corner, and it doesn't work. Luke O'Nien basically blocks the ball. It falls to Maeda, and he puts it away. Quite a good finish. So Sunderland finally have a striker scoring goals. They then the 24th minute, Luke O'Nien gets his second goal of the season, and it's 3-0. And Sheffield Wednesday haven't really been in it. They've had a couple of counter attacks as you would expect with their front three of Lowe, Musaba, and Gassama. But they weren't really in the game. They brought on Smith at half time to maybe go a bit more direct. That didn't seem to work, and that wasn't helped by in the 47th minute. Jack Clark gets his assist for Mayenda to make it 4, and then it's basically a non-event for the rest of the game. Um, we were trying to work out how Clark was going to end up getting any bonus because he hadn't done anything, but as soon as he did, he ended up with 3 bonus. So yeah, really impressed with Sunderland. High press, um, quite a young team, so they can obviously got the legs to run around. I was a little bit worried because Brown wasn't in the team, but Chris Rigg, was he 16, 17? He
17, I think. Yeah.
we saw flashes of him last year, but he now looks ready to make a bigger impact this year. It sort of looks like Bellingham. It's sort of a six ball. Rigg and Bellingham played as eights. It seemed quite fluid. Dan Neil sat. But yeah, you've got Hume, Sirkin, great options on the wing back, fullbacks. Robertson, Clark on the wing. Bellingham, Rigg, Mayenda. If at the minute he looks like his first choice, although will they sign someone is the big question before the window closes. So Angus, 3 Sunderland players go.
Jack Clark, Dennis Sirkin, and oh, this is tough because of his price. I'm gonna say Mayenda. Um,
6 million, isn't he?
yeah.
Might be 6-1 if he's gone up.
Um, I think what I said before the season was picking him up front for them because he was the only one we didn't know was bad. And he looks like he's got something about him. Obviously, he got very lucky with one of the goals, but there certainly looks to be something about him. Obviously, Roberts being back and playing regularly is big for them. Sirkin being back, another one that's clearly made a big difference. Um, like you say, I was really impressed with Rig. Um, I think '09. I love that he gets an assist for the goal where it's kicked into his shin, goes perfectly to Mayenda, and he gets an assist for that. I felt a bit sorry for James Beadle because I'm not sure there's much more he could have done. Um, in fact,
No, I don't
he
think so.
made one really good save late in the first half to stop it being 4-0 before half time. Um, and yeah, it wasn't right for Sheffield Wednesday. They struggled throughout. Um, and yeah, it's I know we talked a little bit beforehand, and you mentioned it, but bit of a mare for Josh Windass. Um, and yeah, it's one of those things I think you can learn from that from Sheffield Wednesday's point of view, but you don't want to dwell on it too much. For Sunderland, it's 2 games in, 6 points on the board, 6 goals, I think.
Yeah,
And it's
2 clean
looking good at
sheets.
the moment under Regis Lebris. And as you say, options throughout the team.
Great game at the weekend, Sunderland Burnley. You're going to
Yeah.
find out a lot about both teams there, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of people will be looking at the moment at buying Burnley and Sunderland players, and they're playing each other.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I thought it was really interesting watch, and really impressive from Sunderland in particular. I mean, obviously not impressive from Sheffield Wednesday, but Um,
So, so, a lot was made about Ingleson and Bannon's performance. Are you worried about that dynamic, or do you just think they really struggled with the press?
yeah, I think they just struggled with the sort of press, the energy, the legs of the Sunderland team. And so maybe that's something for Danny Roll to consider in sort of a, I guess, horses for courses way going forward. Um, but looking at some of the teams they're going to play, obviously you can talk about whether it be an issue versus Leeds, but for example, then against like Millwall, are you as concerned about that sort of thing? But I think it's one of those that he may have to look at like with some of these opponents in terms of the way it was exposed by Sunderland.
If you had any Wednesday, would you get rid?
Um, Not necessarily. I mean,
Yeah,
I
sure,
I
right.
have Josh Windass. I might get rid just because um, of what I'm looking at around, and he's sort of the one where I can make a move. Um, so, but if you have sort of even someone like Valerie or Beadle, um, Jamal Lowe, I wouldn't be rushing to get rid of any of them personally.
Do you think Ugbo's coming in here soon, isn't he? It's
Yeah, it's got to be a matter of time, surely. If not this weekend, you can't have many more without him in the lineup.
yeah. I think that would probably mean Lowe will go to the wing. Would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can argue which one of Musaba and Gassama is going to drop out of the sort of regular starting lineup, but um, I'm not sure which one. I guess it would just be sort of a wait and see.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that's sort of the Sunderland Sheffield Wednesday game, which was nice as sort of the standalone Sunday game as well. Um, the final game I'm going to talk about is Sheffield United against QPR, which really felt like a game of two halves. Um, you had Sheffield United get out to a very quick lead, and I mean, had a few messages from people being like, "Oh my God, like how quickly do we get Sheffield United players in now?"
Yeah.
With the early goals from Harmer and Moore. Um, I think the Moore goal was assisted by Harmer. The Harmer goal was assisted by Callum O'Hare. So you think the three main ones, other than sort of Burrows, that people
Yeah.
have all returning, and you thought, oh, here we go. Uh, didn't really do anything the rest of the half. Anderson got injured late in the first half, which is a blow for QPR. But Jimmy Dunn got a goal back, and Chris Hermitage, our QPR correspondent, did say um, that they were aiming for Jimmy Dunn. I think it was after the first game, or maybe it was in the uh, preview pods that they aim for Jimmy Dunn with their set pieces, and it worked out in this case. Um, and even after Jack Colback got sent off, which is impressive given that he was only a half-time substitution. Um, Lyndon Dykes popped up with an 88th minute goal, a very good finish right
What's a
into the
good
corner.
finish?
He's grown an impressive head of hair, has Big Lyndon.
I don't
Um,
like it.
no, he's got to go back to the shaved head.
Yeah.
Um, but which rescued a point for them. Um, Lyndon Dykes scoring an away goal is obviously very noteworthy for QPR. I know he hasn't had many of them for a good while now. Um, but I think Chris came through with a few thoughts after the game, and he was sort of saying the QPR were really bad first half, and Sheffield United, while obviously sort of doing quite well, it was made easier for them, um, and they did so little. There was the odd moment from Dembele, but not much else. Um, he did say that Harmer was sort of more involved, and he would recommend him over O'Hare at the moment. Um, the only problem with Harmer is whether he's going to be there.
Yeah.
Um, and then he said Anderson got injured, will be out for a while, so sell if you own him or avoid. In the second half, apparently Sheffield United just dropped off. QPR sort of improved, done with the goal. Uh, he also, what I found interesting was he said Sheffield United didn't really look any better when QPR went down to 10, and particularly didn't look to take any more of the any more control when they went down to 10. And he said Dembele was the main man. Saito looked bright. And he said outside of Jimmy Dunn, don't touch the defence. He also,
Oh,
yeah, yeah, he said just Jimmy Dunn um, until they sort out the middle of the pitch. Um, and he also said they miss Isaac Hayden, which what a place to be in, missing Isaac Hayden. Um, so I think that's sort of interesting insight to go along with how the game went. Um, and I think it throws up some interesting questions, like you said about you immediately reacted to that with the Kenneth Powell thing, but just sort of I guess on both sides. Um, what does this leave you feeling about? I mean, either or both of uh, these sides in terms of options.
so I've got O'Hare and Moore, and for they've got quite a nice period of games. Sheffield United, um, away at Norwich, home to Watford, away at Hull, home to Derby, Portsmouth away, Swansea at home. So they've got a nice run. Um, I've got, like I mentioned, I've got O'Hare and Moore. They're both going to be there. Um, O'Hare, I do worry about whether it's going to be typical O'Hare where he looks brilliant, but he's just never the best option. And as Chris said with Hamer, if Hamer's there, he he's just got better end product, whether it's a goal or an assist. So long term, I do wonder if going point 0.5 more and getting a Hamer it would be the better move, or is it? It might even be
It's
1 million
one
more.
million.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I don't mind Burrows, but I'm not sure he's had the impact a lot of people thought he would do. Um, so yeah, I think those any of those four you've got is fine. They've obviously brought in Raksaki, who it sounds like he's not really had much of a pre-season. So I do wonder if he comes straight in. He's going to play on the right side for Brooks, or whether Brooks stays in for a couple more games. Um, but yeah, I think if you investing in Sheffield United is fine. For QPR, they've got an okay run of fixtures as well. Plymouth, Luton away, and then Wednesday away, Millwall at home. I think I would go maybe an attacking option for QPR. They're all priced around 6 million. So if you can get in, Anderson sounds like he's out, but while Chair's not there, maybe a Dembele or a Saito comes in. I don't hate those. I'm not going anywhere near the strikers. They started Seller at the first game. He then started Fry for the second game, and it's Dykes who's got the goal. So
Yeah,
yeah, they're all 6 million, and they're all an avoid.
yeah, definitely. I mean, even in the wide areas, sort of like working out what exactly it's going to be. Alfie Lloyd started on the wing, which
Yeah, youngster.
in this game, so that sort of I guess adds another wrinkle. But yeah, I think there are interesting options from both, but it's just about sort of where you need the players and the price point that you need a player at as well. Um, but I think it's interesting, and I think it's potentially a concern for Sheffield United that in terms of just sort of completely dropping off and it ending up costing them 2 points here. Um, so that's sort of the games we really wanted to cover. Is there anything else from the in particular from the other games that you wanted to mention, Dan?
I was at Portsmouth Luton, so I should probably mention. Um, I, I don't know how much you can take from the last 60, 70th minute. It was basically Luton just defending. Portsmouth weren't good enough to break us down. You'd probably argue Luton had the best chance with Adebayo one-on-one towards the end, but the first 30 minutes, Luton should have been one or two goals up. Morris missed a one-on-one. Adebayo missed, um, not missed, it was a couple of great saves from the goalie Norris. Thought Portsmouth looked better on the counter, so I don't think a lot of teams are going to sit in like we had to towards the end. Um, I think for Lou and Doughty's the best option. Morris and Adebayo are going to score goals eventually. We have signed McGuinness today from Cardiff. He's 5 million. I'll be amazed if he's not doesn't end up being first choice. So you can get into the Luton team for 5 million. Um, Portsmouth, Sammy Silvera. I can see why he got loaned out from Middlesbrough. His his end product wasn't very good in the second half. It was quite bad, really. But yeah, I think they're going to be fine. But Portsmouth, it's like we thought. They're not going to be an Ipswich, but they're going to be fine. I think.
Yeah. Um, I think that's probably a sort of fair assessment on both in terms of where we're at with them right now. Just whistle stop around a few things for me. Derby 1 Borough nil. Looking at all of this, I'm not sure how it's ended up 1-0 to Derby. Sometimes you just have those days, but yeah, really was one of those days for Borough. Um, After sort of setting up the Derby goal themselves as well for Caden Jackson. Um, West Brom Leeds, lack of attacking quality, it felt like, really, at least in terms of the actual execution. Um, and Plymouth Hull. Sissoko did a goal. He was on my bench, but um,
So I don't even have him anymore.
it,
But
it only took till game week 2 for him to return. All the preseason hype wasn't for nothing.
Preston managed to lose their second manager in 2 weeks. They have hired Heckingbottom, which I still don't know if Heckingbottom's any good because that Sheffield United side was basically just plug and play, and he basically just done what Wilder did to get him up. But um, I am intrigued. I'd rather them have waited a few days because Luton played Preston, and I don't think they've scored in 7 games, so we all know what's going to happen here. One
Yeah,
nil Preston.
absolutely. And I will mention, because just to make sure, as part of that, Swansea on the board, um, Ronald and Abdullahi 4.5 mid, 2-2 after scoring the League Cup in midweek. I was never going to play him, but it's just sort of nice to see when you have a cheap option like that, particularly when it's the one you've gone with. Them sort of doing something. It's like, okay, maybe sort of I'm on the right lines here. Maybe he might be useful at some point. I'm not sure how much, like whether he will continue to play, but it's just that sort of thing where it's a nice sort of almost backup to have.
Yeah. We better mention Norwich Blackburn 2-2. Norwich made quite a few changes, as I mentioned. Sargent signs on the on the score sheet for Norwich. Still up in the air with Johnny Rowe. Kamara looks like he's handed in a transfer request as well. So yeah, it's not all hunky dory at Norwich. Blackburn, I think that they'll be happy. 4 points
Mm.
from 2 games. Their strikers are scoring. Both look good. Oh well, they didn't. Hedges scored and Ohashi again for the second. Um, yeah, I think if they are able to spend some of the Sammy Smodic's money, I still think a goalie maybe. I think they'll do all right.
Yeah, agreed. So that's sort of everything there in terms of covering off sort of I guess the main talking points. We'll get into the questions. Thank you to everyone who's sort of sent us one. We'll start off with non-stop FPL, who said, assuming people now flock to Cooper as their keeper, is it worth getting a Sheffield United defender to actually gain an advantage from their clean sheets? Um, so I think there's been a couple of questions. I think there's another question elsewhere, but I'll come to it afterwards about Cooper. And I think there's two ways of looking at Cooper. And we sort of had this conversation before the season actually started when he was first linked. Of like, on the one hand, yes, you've got Sheffield United keeper at 4.5. Like, that's great value. On the other hand, if there are enough good outfield assets from Sheffield United, then you're blocking yourself off with the 4.5 keeper. We saw people at times with Dieng last season when they wanted to get into triple borough outfield, but had Dieng that it became an issue, or particularly Fladkey at
Yeah,
Ipswich became a big issue for people. So I think it's that balance of like, yes, it's a cheap way in. However, when you're sort of looking at some of these outfield players, and it's like, actually, are you blocking yourself off from something by going with him? So I know it doesn't really answer the question. But I think there is some logic to potentially even just with one of the defenders in terms of the greater capability. I know keepers can now get bonus, but in terms of like the greater likelihood, I guess, of more points. I don't know if you sort of feel similar there, Dan.
yeah, pretty similar. I also think, as you mentioned, with the bet bonus for the keepers now, I don't think going to. I think five is okay now because it probably
Yeah.
works out as reaching like points per million. It probably doesn't affect if you go to 5 million now. So um, yeah, I think I'd agree with you. I'm not sure Cooper will be the best. Not because I don't think he'll score well. It's the like the blocking of the other players. So yeah, I don't think he's everyone's going to flock to him.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that will probably have gone with keepers that they're not necessarily looking to move as well. So I think
Well,
it's
if you've got Jensen,
yeah, well I went Davies, so I've got
yeah,
an issue. Um Gaffr Hoops has asked, who are the best three forwards at the moment, and who are the best Burnley assets from what we know? Cheers, gents. I mean, had you right.
I mean, yeah, I think there's lots. It's hard to say with the strikers. I think it might just be one where you've got to keep rotating them. Like I've got Joseph, and he was probably going to get maybe cut, but then I saw Sheffield Wednesday, and you're like, yeah, maybe he can stay for one more week. Um, like you mentioned, had you right? I do wonder
I'm
if
gonna say Latte Lath as well. I thought he had moments in that game. I think he had a few key passes, um, torched any chance of the bonus by getting booked, but he was still involved.
yeah, I think Sargent, if he stays, he'll do well. And not, I know Luton strikers haven't started great, um, but they both could have got a goal against Portsmouth. Um, they will do well. Moore's at
Yeah,
quite a
Kiefer
nice
Moore.
price. Yeah, we know he's going to play. Um, and even if you drop down to some of the 6 millions or 5.5, Harris is doing well. If Mayen stays at Sunderland, Mayulu from Bristol City. I know he's not started, but he's scoring points. Portsmouth, when they saw out who their striker is, I know Sorensen's not fully up to fit, but he did look pretty lively when he came on. So I think if he becomes first choice, he could be an option as well.
Yeah. In terms of, I guess, sort of narrowing it down in terms of like for me, three at the moment, I'd probably still have Latte Laugh.
Yeah,
Um, I'd say had you right, but I think, that's partially just because I got the big haul off him. You could easily argue it's Kiefer Moore. Um, and I'm gonna say Gay from Blackburn. I know he returned. I think he looks decent as well.
I think that's
Best Burnley assets from what we know so far. We both mentioned
that's
Pires,
Perez.
particularly because you know
Yeah,
he's going to be there. I still think Lyle Foster. Um,
I
I think
think
I agree with you on Kolyosho as well.
yeah, I think Brown. We saw Brownhill a couple of years ago. He'll tick over, but I think for explosiveness, it'll be Kolyoshu. I think.
Yeah. Um, Maybe someone like Connor Roberts. It seems like he's going to stick around, and we've seen he's capable. So
But he's is he point 0.5 more than Perez? Like that's
yeah,
it's
I
just not
think that
going to
would
happen,
be
is it?
if you're going to go for two of them defensively, which I'm sure over the course of the season for a Scott Parker team, in terms of the way they play, that can actually be beneficial. But whether you're going to invest that much in them, like, is a different call. But I don't think that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Um, FPL Hardman, which teams or players are currently being overrated? He's mentioned Burnley, 5 goals off an XG of less than one, perhaps. And which teams are currently being underrated? Um, so I don't think Burnley are necessarily being overrated, or I do think, yeah, you can get sidetracked on the whole they won 5-0. Um, I think it's tough really to sort of say too many are being overrated or underrated. Um, I mean, we talked about them a little bit, but based on the first couple of games and everything, maybe Watford are being a little bit underrated.
Under.
I think there's still a lot of like people who are like, oh, they've just had a couple of games, like,
I mean,
um,
I'm not sure. I think they might be being overrated. When
uh,
when not so much the Stoke game, when you look at the
mm.
goals from the Millwall game,
Oh yeah, that one was just like, what is going on? Um, but yeah, there's not too many that jump out as sort of being overrated or underrated. Um,
yeah, because like even teams like Leeds and Luton who haven't started well, Leeds should have probably beaten Portsmouth. Um, their players would have scored more. Like going away at West Brom, getting a draw, is that a terrible result? Like
Not
not
at all.
really. Luton, I know they had the disastrous game against Burnley and they deserved to lose, but if Portsmouth kept, if it was 11 against 11, I'm pretty sure Luton would have found the way, having watched the first 30 minutes. So, um, yeah, I just think it's the typical championship at the minute. Everyone's beating everyone. I think you'll get more idea maybe when after the transfer window. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit early at the moment to make some of these assessments, because the takes are bouncing around so much back and forth as well. Um, James Wood has asked, who are the best 6 to 7 million mids to consider? It looks like Lucas Anderson has a hammy. I think it's a groin injury, but he's going to be out for a while either way. And there's a cheeky second question. Cooper is probably the best goalkeeper now, but unlikely to be good for Jeepers keepers. Worth getting him anyway. So I knew there was another question, but we've sort of done the Cooper chat already. But the best 6 to 7 million mids, we've sort of mentioned um, Dembele. We've mentioned um,
AMB. Oh, he's
Kayembe,
fine.
although he's
He's less.
slightly cheaper, isn't he? Um,
Mendes Lang is going to be talisman, I think, for
yeah.
Derby. I'm not not sure if you want a Derby.
One that
Bellingham.
interested me when I was watching the highlights as well was Liam Miller at Hull. We
Yeah,
saw him do well for Preston last year. He looked very bright on what I saw from the highlights at the weekend.
I think I just
Um,
want Hull to settle down before I
yeah,
go into Hull.
and we mentioned sort of
They
uh,
can.
Scott Twine. Um, and I mean, I'm gonna say it in this fashion because it's the only way I feel comfortable saying it. Duncan Watmore is the joint top scoring midfielder.
Yeah, but
That's all
he has.
that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to make that factual observation and leave it there.
Let's be. Duncan Watmore has about 4 games a season when he's like the best winger in the league, and then he
Yeah,
just does. He it feels like he's had 2 of them already.
yeah, I very much agree. Petri Annanen has asked, are Kayembe or Chakvatadze a real deal, considering they are Watford? Um, I think so at this point. We
I
need to
think
see
so. Yeah.
more, but um, both
I
doing well in those roles, sort of off the striker.
think we mentioned with the fixtures. I want to see 3 more games. Let him get rid of. I think I can't remember who it was. The 2 tricky games in 4 and 5,
Mm.
and then I think if they're still scoring, then they played against some of the better teams in the league. Um,
I think it's also interesting what with more so Kayembe, I guess. There's been lots of talk about Asprilla leaving. He's been linked with a bunch of moves. If he doesn't leave, it's probably that spot on, I guess, like sort of the quote unquote right 10
I
that he
think
would come into.
I saw somewhere that cleverly said he is going. So
Yeah, but there's
I
been
know
like
if he
three different
doesn't, yeah,
reports that he is
yeah,
going.
yeah.
So it's just that whole thing of like, particularly in terms of what you were saying about getting to the end of the window, because if he's still there, then obviously that changes things as well.
Obviously, if you're getting basically a number 10 for even even if he goes up to closer to 6 million, he's
Yeah,
still going to be an option, isn't he, for
yeah,
whatever team in
exactly,
this league.
exactly. Um, Brian Mzobe has asked, is Morris a season keeper and a Leeds a team to avoid at the moment? Um, I think Morris will be an option. I'm not sure anyone I'd view aside from maybe like Jack Clark as a season keeper.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Don't worry about Morris got substituted because we basically had to take a striker off, and Adebayo is a bit better at pressing. That's why it was actually a big decision by Edwards because he's captain and he's
mm,
basically he was top goal scorer in the championship last year. So well, last time he was in it. So um, yeah, if you've got Morris, like you're not getting rid of him before Preston, surely.
no. And are Leeds a team to avoid at the moment?
I'm not sure I'd be buying their players. Let's put it that way.
Mm. Like I think particularly the defensive ones, particularly if you're on Firpo or Bogle, I think that's fine. If you're on probably Dan James more than Nonto because there's more talk about Nonto leaving, but like
Mm.
that's fine. Joseph for the moment, but I think all of them, you're probably looking at sort of long and hard at all of them in terms of like, how much longer am I going to give you, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I've only got 2, Bogle and Joseph. I did think about getting rid of Joseph just to downgrade, maybe
Yeah,
getting a bit more money, but I can't do that now with Sheffield Wednesday putting in that performance.
yeah. Um, FPL Blindside said, what changes would you make? He's got 2 threes but 0 in the bank, so he's got Pairs in goal, Firpo, Engel, Doughty back 3, Sykes, Brownhill, Clark, Sissoko midfield, Rotter, Lattolathan, Sargent up top with Ozo, G, and Elder on the bench along with Vickers. Well, I think
I mean,
Rutter out is
that's going.
is the obvious one now that his move to Brighton is confirmed.
And you can go to anyone in the game,
Yeah,
so that's nice.
um, I think
Sykes,
Sykes is the other one where you could maybe, particularly if you get a little bit more money from downgrading Rutter, you could then potentially do something interesting from Sykes as well.
yeah, because Sykes is he 5'5"? You could
I think
easily
so.
get him a midfielder between 6 and 7, and that would
Yeah.
still be quite nice.
So I think those are probably the two players I'd be looking at the moment.
He hasn't got any
Niall
Sheffield
Fairbrother
United.
has yeah, Sheffield United. Niall Fairbrother has asked best budget striker options 6 mil and under. Well, I think we've mentioned a few in terms of Gay at Blackburn, um, Harris, Sinclair, Armstrong. I think those are probably the main ones.
Yeah, I'm not sure Sorensen starts. Although their manager did say Sadie started because I think he's a bit more quicker, and they thought with Luton's higher line they could get him behind.
Yeah, I mean, I'd maybe add. I know it's not strictly there, but Mayenda at 6.1. I know you said
Yeah,
6 mil and under, but depending on how strict that is. Eric Ness Onstad has asked, he's got 2 free transfers and a row problem. Where to go? Also, with the Rutter sale as well, Leeds a team to avoid. We've covered the Leeds thing, but where to go from Johnny Rowe?
is he 8 million?
He is.
I mean, that's
So it depends on money in the bank. If you have sort of, I mean, 0.5 in the bank gets you up to Koleosho, 1 million in the bank gets you to Harmer. Um, if not, you've got O'Hare, you've got Raksaki, um, or you go down a little bit. I mean, we talked about Bellingham, Roberts, sort of Dembele, um, Kayembe, sort of. It's a lot of the same guys, I guess, just depending on how far exactly you want to move away.
yeah, I agree. Always got to throw in Sakamoto as well.
Yeah. Uh, Albion Easter has asked, is it worth doubling up on Burnley defenders with a tough fixture against Sunderland coming up?
I probably wouldn't. It
No.
depends. If you got like Roberts and you're looking to get Pires, then I think that's a bit. Uh, but if you have Pires and you're going to go to Roberts, then I'm not as happy with that.
No, I think I'd want to see how it shakes out a little bit more with some of these players before I made that sort of move. Um, and the final question is from Tommy, Horse Winners too. It's an obvious one, but do you have a chip plan right now after 2 game weeks? Um, in terms of the boosts, not really. I'd say like there's sort of rough outlines of weeks that could play boosts, but it sort of feels a little bit for me. Like I know we've talked about this before. Like my plan is still, I'm not going to play anything until the transfer window closes. I don't know what your thoughts are in general on that, Dan.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I think we just saw over the last week, Rutter's gone. Odebear just went out,
Yeah.
gone within no reason. Um, Doughty could go, players like that. So I just don't think it's worth the risk at the minute.
No, and you have no idea who's gonna rock up in the game as well. Like you might get one of these teams like Leeds bring in an
Yeah,
absolute incredible player, and you're sort of sat there like, shit, I wish I still had that boost to play on them. Like, so I think that's part of it for me. It's just a bit of patience, see the lay of the land.
maybe someone like something like a Jeepers Keepers.
Mm.
You can understand if you wanted
Yeah,
to do that.
yeah. Because particularly because you're less reliant on sort of an, an or you're reliant on a smaller number of players. Um, so that's all the questions we've had. Thank you to everyone for those. Um, we will be back after the weekend's games. I can't remember what exactly the sequencing is in terms of when we'll be back, but we'll be back after those. There won't be a Super League pod this week, but I'll try and put sort of some thoughts out on Twitter. I'll also put a tweet out, probably from the pod account, asking for any specific questions that people have, and try and give you some answers to those. But try and obviously put out some thoughts ahead of the weekend first, before that, to hopefully head off some of your questions before that. Um, Anything else to add, Dan?
I think that's it.
Okay, so all that's left for me to say is thank you for listening and goodbye.
Goodbye.